I'd love to bring to stage an old-time friend, an expert, and what a better way to sort of transition into this idea of table and stream with the man and the author of that concept, Tyler Akidau. And so Tyler is an engineer at Snowflake and has probably pioneered some of the world's best systems on this. I've known Tyler for over 10 years because of his work in Google Mill Wheel. And a couple of years ago, he talked about his new work at Snowflake of merging, tables with the stream and this duality. So Tyler, please welcome to Sage.
Thanks, Alex. Really happy to be here.
Yeah, well, thanks for joining us today. Tyler, perhaps we kick it off with just this idea of why is Iceberg the keystone that unifies, I think, streaming and batch in practice today, and how do you think the world will be built differently with this concept?
Yeah, so I think what's really valuable with Iceberg, as you said before, this idea of streams and tables and the duality of them, it's been around for a while. Like we've been talking about it for a while, and for those of you who are maybe not as familiar, the idea is, when you're talking about your data sets, there's kind of two main forms that may exist in. One is data in motion, which is, when you think of streams, that's what you're thinking of. And you're all familiar with Kafka, obviously. It's basically this sequence of changes to your data over time. And there's a ton of use cases where that's the way you want to operate on your data. These operational use cases, you're connecting microservices, like you want to see, what is the thing that's happening right now and how do I react to it and do something with it? Super valuable. And companies, basically, I often say you can throw a rock, you hit a company that uses Kafka in some way. Like it's just everywhere because it's such a foundational piece of large scale, even small scale distributed systems. But then the flip side of that is this idea of tables, and you don't always want to operate on your data, just sort of the head of what's happening now. Sometimes you need to look at it in aggregate. You need to look at the big picture, and that's when you want what we call your data at rest, or your data to table. And it's really just this accumulation of your data set over time. And there's various ways it can accumulate. Maybe it's an append-only table. It's going to look a lot like the full extent of your stream in that case. Maybe you're doing upserts, and so you've got some primary key or something. In that case, it's going to shape and evolve over time. But regardless, the value there is you've got your whole data set, and you can then analyze it in place, analyze it against other data sets, pull insights out of it. And so back to your original question of why is Iceberg relevant here? Iceberg is relevant because if you think about streaming's kind of had this de facto standard of Kafka for a long time. Like, if you're going to stream data, you're probably using some form of Kafka. Tables has not really been in the same place. We've kind of had these various silos. So Iceberg is really democratizing this idea of you can store your data in a tabular format, and then you can come and access it with any tool you want that is Iceberg compatible. So you can use Snowflake, you can use Trino, you can use Dremio, you can use Spark. And so I think the fact that we're now kind of establishing a peer of Kafka in some sense for the table side means as we evolve the world such that you can interoperate between these cleanly, now we're starting to have this full picture of the stream and table duality. And that's kind of where the Redpanda support here really ties in. Redpanda is this very nice integration of just built into Redpanda Kafka itself. It's able to just create these Iceberg tables for you, and with all the reliability and ease of use and performance that you all expect. So that's really my take on it, is this democratization of tables and the chance for us to really bridge the two worlds in a sort of a universal way.
Totally. And to me, I think the value which you mentioned, that if I'm an engineer and I'm building, the value is that I simply get to choose the best engine. I think that there's going to be phenomenal competitive pressure in the market where it's like, hey, we're all now competing on who has the best product, because you know what, they're just like, Iceberg is here and people are going to be able to access data in whichever way that they want. And so they're really going to lean in on best of class products. And so I'm excited to see you guys on the integration. I think something that doesn't really get talked about, which is really crucial as I personally think about this duality, is the schematization of the streams, and perhaps the schema evolution, which is also a really hard concept. And so as you're querying the data, you're like, okay, if everything happens to be 3 fields, first name, last name, and whatever age, and you're just doing like aggregation on, orientation or age or names or whatever, maybe you're doing a frequency count, that's relatively straightforward. But what happens in the real world is that your data is messy and there's this weird epochs where somebody's going to fat finger a particular column, or now your column looks a little bit differently. And so what's interesting is like the like native integration with the catalogs, the native integration with the schemas, like the evolution. Perhaps you can share, how do you think about like structuring your data so that you get good query performance when you actually read it on the other end?
Yeah, schematization is really important. I think the other big aspect is understanding and thinking about how you want your, at least for analytical engines, how you want your data clustered. Iceberg, it's interesting to talk about Iceberg. Iceberg often uses partitioning to kind of affect this. So if you have a partition table, that's one way that you can kind of cluster your data, so that you can say, well, when I go to run a query and I'm going to filter on this field, I know that most of the data for that is in this partition, and you can hit a whole bunch less of the files that you need to hit. So those are other things you need to think about. The file format as well. Iceberg, I think most people are using Parquet under the covers, but you can use lots of different things with Iceberg. You can use Avro, you can use Orc. So that can have an effect as well. But yeah.
And I think when you merge them both, you've talked many times, I think, in the world, and some of your work on extending SQL even was around timing. Timing is so hard when when you have late arriving data, when you start to think about windowing. If I'm an engineer, and perhaps the value is that maybe I don't have to think about timing as hard, or I'm not sure if you have intuition.
That is definitely one of the things we've found at Snowflake. Like as you said, I came from a world where like focusing on windowing and how you chop up your data over time was super important. And when you're dealing with streams directly, it's highly important. When you're dealing with tables, it turns out you can kind of do that after the fact, and the cost of it gets lost in the noise somewhat of all the other stuff you're doing to scan all the data and process it. And so you do have kind of more flexibility to a certain extent. That isn't to say that you don't want to be mindful about how you're storing your data and dealing with late data, but you do have this ability to kind of retroactively, sort of pull that stuff out or tweeze out those kinds of things after the fact, which is really nice.
Yeah, I get that this is where the catalog is a cool concept, because in my mind, it's the thing that is advancing the tailing iterator of like on this bucket storage system, like, hey, you have these new files, and it's mostly fine. I agree. I would say, for most people building applications, it's like if you make a query, and then, in a minute or so, you get slightly different results, as long as you have consistency, right? Like that's sort of the key. As long as the results are repeatable and predictable, then I think that it's going to be easier for people than like really, late arriving data is such a gnarly concept. And this could be an entire conference on that. But I do think that the future will be easier for people.
Yeah, and even if it's not like there are a ton of subtleties here. I think it's a good call out of like this consistency across tables. We actually just submitted a SIGMOD paper. I hope it gets accepted, but we talk about some of this and formalizing it and how you think about it. So.
Oh, that's so cool. Can't wait to read it. Well, Tyler, thank you so much for joining us today. I hope all of you got a chance to read from Tyler. He's like, one of the world's leading experts on these concepts. If you check out his latest papers, I think there was one submitted last year, and then obviously the new one. Hopefully it gets accepted too. If you have any questions, please type him in the chat. He's going to be monitoring you, and we'll make sure that we answer all of your questions. Thank you, Tyler, for joining us today. It was a pleasure having you.
No problem.